My guest today is author Peter Bailey.
Delighted to be here, Tom. Thanks so much. I'm the president of the Prouty Project. We're a strategic planning and leadership firm here in Minneapolis. The firm started about 35 years ago by Jeff Prouty, and I've been there about 17 years, doing both leadership and strategic planning.
So one fun thing for me is that you live within a mile of me. It's
Right.
interesting to have an author so close, and I've seen you drive by many times as I've been walking the dogs there. Do you want to talk about some of the trips you've taken? So interesting. Do you want to talk about your trip across Africa?
Sure. Well, I've had a life that I am blessed to have lived. There are some hard parts, certainly, and there are some amazing adventure parts. But my mother was a single parent. There's more story behind that, too. But she was a teacher and took us every summer somewhere in the world. And one year she said, "Hey, kids, let's go to India," 1976. And we jumped on a sort of a Mercedes minibus with about 15 other people and drove from Germany through Austria-Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and Nepal. I was 16 years old, and of course my mind just lifted off, and I became sort of this global traveler at a very young age. Then I did a trip to Indonesia for 3 months on a student exchange when I was 17. And the Africa trip was kind of a fluke. She was reading the Sunday Times and said, "Hey, here's an ad, 16 weeks, 540 pounds, which is about $1,000. How'd you like to go to Africa instead of your spring semester senior year in high school?" It took me a nanosecond to say yes. Then, of course, I had to get the principal of the high school out in Chappaqua, Horace Greeley High School, to say, "Hey, I have one gym credit. I still need to graduate. Would you give me a gym credit for traveling in 6 months across Africa?" And he said, "Absolutely." And so at 18, I flew to London and with my sister, and she was there for a week and flew back. And I met this group of ragtag individuals, and we traveled through England, down through Germany to France to Italy, down to crossed over to Sicily on a ferry boat. We slept outside on the deck of the boat. I remember sleeping on a pile of rope. There was no place for us to sleep. So I curled up on a wet, gnarly, bristly, the anchor ropes for these boats, and crossed into Tunisia, and then crossed Tunisia, Algeria, Nigeria to Cameroon, and then across diagonally from Central Africa through Zaire, Rwanda, up in the mountains, down to Tanzania, and then to Kenya. 18 years old, was a 4-month trip that extended into 6 months. And again, a life-changing experience. I had malaria. We went through cholera country. We had to forge passports to get across the border. It was and the group leader left us a third of the way through. And interestingly enough, I'm still friends with one of the British couples that was on that trip. We've been best friends all our lives, and we're actually going to go visit them in May again in Spain.
Was it one of those trips where there were lots of individual moments that might not have been so great, but looking back on it, it was fabulous?
Yeah, that was probably true. In fact, there's a great joke we tell in Outward Bound that I'm a part of. Kurt Hahn was the founder of Outward Bound, and he'd ask these young students about their course, and they had sailed difficult waters in Wales or something. And he says, "How was your course?" And the young person would say, "Excellent, sir, except at the time." And so that stayed with me, that there were excellent things in hindsight. At the time, they were a little hard. There were points where the mosquitoes in the jungle were so impenetrable that we had to smear our skin with diesel fuel, which is not recommended, just to keep the bugs off our faces. And then we ran out of money, ran out of food. As I said, I had malaria, and the tropical ulcer I tell about in the book had to be carved out without anesthesia. But, in totality, what an amazing experience to have as an 18-year-old.
So did you keep journals? It sounds like you've done a lot of journaling throughout your life.
I've been one of those people who's saved every single thing I've written all my life. Some of it probably deserves to be thrown away, but I do have journal pages from this, and I wish I'd kept a better journal. I have my friends in England kept a better journal through it, and she wrote a beautiful coverage of the trip. But I do have pictures and notes, and I took over 300 about 2,000 photos I took with a single camera, single lens reflex camera before digital. So I still have lots of photos of me traveling across the Sahara or going through the jungles.
So you were driving across the sand of the Sahara, right? Some places, no road?
Yeah, correct. So this was 1976. And when you turn your vehicle south from Tunisia into Algeria, you're in a little town called Laguat, and it's really basically an open sand pit. And truly, the Sahara Desert was originally the Mediterranean. And if you know about geology and tectonic plates, what ended up happening was that the ocean was on top of the Sahara. The continent of Africa drove up into Europe, slamming Italy like a nail into Europe, which then pushed up the Dolomites and then receded. All the water poured back off of the Sahara and became the Mediterranean. So the Sahara is basically a sea floor. And you'll see these unbelievable structures of basalt, the old volcanic bubblings of early volcanoes out there in the middle of the desert, and then just these ripples of sand that just went on forever. So back in 76, there were no roads. There were just oil drums that were placed as a general direction. Set your compass south-southeast and head to your next town of, from Laguat to Insula to Tamanrasset, and then head to the Niger border.
Did you see a lot of people along that route, or it was pretty deserted along that?
No, not many at all. I remember seeing one, and this became sort of a goal for me. I saw one Range Rover, an early version of a Range Rover and it was gorgeous. And I said, what is that car? I want that car. And the two guys driving it just sort of took off across the desert. We would see occasionally trucks on the horizon headed south also, but because there was no road, it wasn't like there was traffic. And every once in a while, we'd stop for tea at 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock, of course, traveling with British colleagues. And out of the dunes would appear Tuaregs. And they would either have their small children with them or camels, but they kind of appeared and disappeared across the desert. They just blended in. So we would see locals who lived there between the city areas periodically. But for the most part, we were all alone.
How different do you think that trip would be if you tried to do the same thing now?
Yeah, great question. I think probably stronger roads. Again, it's a desert, so you'll have the roads cleared, covered by sand, cleared, covered by sand. But I'm sure with commerce being what it is and everything transports from Europe down to South Africa, I am sure there's a mainline highway there, kind of like from, Phoenix to Tucson or something like that.
So at some point later in the trip, you did start seeing the classic safari animals, giraffes and lions, etc.
We did, yeah. And again, if you haven't been to Africa to see the game parks, it should be on your bucket list, Tom. We first entered the Serengeti, and that was absolutely incredible. Well, actually, Ngorongoro Crater was in Tanzania, and it's a giant, almost like a soup bowl with all the animals on the basin, and that was incredible. They had rhinos, cheetah, elephants, wildebeest, zebra, giraffes, sort of what they call troops of baboons. So you'll see these baboons running. You'll see what was Pumbaa in the Lion King? It was a warthog. You'll see warthogs running. And they have this little tail that looks like it's a flag, like on your mailbox when they run. So it was, again, 1978 when I was there. Wildlife was plentiful, and you could just stand in one spot and just see groupings of animals that live together in an incredible, almost Eden-like harmony.
And you had a flash flood at some point too, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, humans being small of brain sometimes, we camped in what we thought was a perfectly flat place in this dry riverbed in Niger. And we thought this was great. We went to town, got some food, came back, and all of a sudden, we're walking along a river, and we're like, wait, there's not supposed to be a river here. And we realized all the tents and the camp and the truck was in this rapidly growing river that had come from rain falling in the mountains. And when it's that hard packed sand, it's like concrete. And so it didn't absorb the water. It just rushed the water through. So we, in the nick of time, pulled all our gear out, got the tent out, got the truck out of the riverbed, or it would have been washed away. But those were the kind of adventures that happened pretty much daily basis.
And you did have another adventurous trip that started in Europe, right? A little earlier, that there was maybe some rioting near you.
Yeah. Yeah. So 2 years prior, we were heading on that trip with my mom to India, and we had stopped. We were in Iran, and we were staying at this beautiful hotel, Intercontinental, which they had turned from the Shah Abbas. So if you Google Shah Abbas, it was a beautiful former mosque area in Isfahan. Everything with those microscopic mosaic tiles, turquoise dome, and just these high arching areas with bubbling fountains and peacocks wandering around, and tobacco bubble pipes we called Hubble Bubble. They were the water pipes, you know, and you just sit and have tea in this gorgeous place. And I was 16. And then one of the team members got sick, and she and I were friends. So I said I'd take her back up to Tehran. And again, this is early spring of 1976. And I took her to the airport. She got on the plane. I spent the night in a hotel, and that's when things erupted. And I don't have the exact dates, but there were something going on, obviously, in politics. The Shah of Iran was still in power. This is pre-77, pre-79. And he had obviously some conflicting opinions on how he was leading the country. And the riots ensued, and there were, you know, riots in the streets. And of course, I'm just a 16-year-old kid. Like, what's going on? I hear this yelling and shouting and fires, cars being turned over. And I had a little hotel that I was in, just a truly grim little place, brown sheets. They keep the sheets brown for tourists. You know, if you were actually an Iranian, you would have gotten clean bedding, but they don't clean the bedding for Europeans or Americans. It was disgusting. But, and I was terrified. I was in that upstairs second floor window watching what's going on, but I was hungry. And there were no restaurants that I could get to, but I did get to this little newsstand that was closing up rapidly. And I bought bottles of water and little packs of cookies to eat for the night, and scurried back to my quasi hotel room with a door that didn't lock, which was not very secure feeling. So I did one of those classic, you know, drag the bureau in front of the door to lock the door.
So still to this day, if you smell diesel, it brings you back to those times. Is that right?
Yes, it does. Apparently olfactory triggers are memory makers. And so I'll be in, you know, Burnsville on a commute, stopped in traffic, and a truck will go by with diesel, and woof, I'm back. It's a very powerful trigger. And certain foods, grilling, you know, if I have any of I love, you know, Middle Eastern food, and I just go back immediately. So
I should step back and say one reason I'm asking you this stuff is it's in your book that you have had just objectively just a super interesting life, and you document a lot of it in the first at least half or more of your book, right? All the things that you went through to bring you to where you are now. I want to talk more about your youth, some of the dangerous stuff you did as a youth. Like, how about your subway riding?
Well, you know, there were times in my life that, and probably even earlier than that, I was, you know, single child of a single parent, got caught up in the sense of low self-esteem, and I didn't know what to do with that. And my dad had a brain hemorrhage before I was born. And, you know, being a kid in a single parent home in the early 60s wasn't as common as it is today, or appreciated or valued or recognized. And so I felt like the outsider. And as an outsider, of course, I always wanted to fit in. And so I really laid that as the groundwork for, you know, the disease of addiction, the disease of comparison. Who are they? They're wealthier than I am. They've got 5 kids in a family. We only have 2. We're not enough, you know, that kind of thing. And there was that sense of comparison of I'm not enough. And so I struggled early on in my years up to 14, even through those European trips, of trying to figure out who am I. And I wrote, excuse me, the book, The Epic of You, because I was trying to minimize the impact of some of those hard things on my life. And later realized, wait a second, these things actually formed who I am. Things formed who you are, Tom. And rather than exclude them, why not own them and say, wait, those hard things, some of those gave me honey to my heart, gave me compassion, gave me sensitivity, gave me appreciation for everyone's lot in life. And those other hard things that I knew I could get through, like, malaria and dysentery, and gave me a sense that resilience, I can do these hard things. And so I say, those gave me, strength to my sword arm. And so I didn't realize that until many years later. But the subway rides in New York City were my way of dealing with demons. And so not to give away the book or that particular episode, but yeah, I found myself haunted by demons that were, those little voices in your head that tell you you're not enough. And so I would ride between the subway cars in New York City, and I would yell. I would yell as the screeches got louder from the train tracks. I would yell as a way to just sort of vent my frustration of who I was trying to figure myself out in the world. Not my best moments, but probably very cathartic in hindsight.
But you seem to be so willing to try so many things. Like, I'm so interested that you rode a horse bareback in a rodeo.
Yeah, again, small brain, boy. You've seen all the Instagrams on why men don't live longer than women because of silly things. But I was getting ready to go visit friends and rock climb in the Wind Rivers. And I got there early. So I ended up traveling into the mountain area. We did some amazing climbs. We were benighted on the side of the cliff, which is a whole nother story I didn't tell about. But and in my stay afterwards, I had to wait 2 days for my flight. So I stayed and met a guy in town who said, well, I've got a cabin. You're welcome to stay at the cabin. So, and then he mentioned in this town of Lander, Wyoming, there is a rodeo. And so I thought, well, I'll go up to the rodeo. And of course, I had done the classic New Yorker in Wyoming thing, which was buy a pair of cowboy boots and a cowboy hat. And so I was looking the complete dude at this, at this rodeo. In fact, the people there joking with me said, who makes your hat? And I had to take the hat off and look at it. And they laughed because you ought to know who makes your hat, boy, And so I, was humiliated multiple times in my little stay there on the rodeo. But one of the young women there, who was an heiress to a very famous family in California, said, I'm thinking about buying this horse. Do you want to ride it? Again, small brain and eager to try things. I said, sure. So I get on this horse bareback. And, unbeknownst to me, this young boy comes riding up next to us and he says, do you want to race? And I'm like, no. And next thing I know, he's racing, the horse takes off, and all I have to hold on to are the reins and the mane at the base of where a saddle would be sitting. So I am wrapped into that tightly, holding on for dear life. The rodeo is over, but everybody is still in the bleachers chatting with family and friends. But they all sort of stop and think, oh, wait, there's another rodeo show going on. What's happening here? And so I am galloping, full gallop across this arena in Lander, Wyoming. And the horse goes to the left, of course, and I keep going straight. And I plow in about 10 inches of loam. Those arenas are meant to have soft soil for the hooves of the horses, but I plowed in a really good trough, shook myself off. The horse stops looking at me like I'm an idiot, of course. I grabbed the reins and I whispered, truly, I can think back to this moment, to the horse, please help me. I've got like one shot to get back on you. And so without any stirrups or step up or anything, I was able to throw my leg up on this horse, get back on it, and ride slowly back to my group, humiliated, looking at them like slapping their legs, just dying laughing. Thank goodness this New Yorker came out to ride. They made the show. And I had torn the muscles in the inside of my legs from gripping this horse so badly. The next week, I could barely walk. It was like having two grapefruits rubbing against each other. I had strained everything in my legs to hold on, and I was in agony. But at that point, I was glad to be alive.
But you went on to play polo as an adult, right? Or maybe in your 50s.
I did. Yeah. Didn't get enough, apparently, humiliation. But about 55, I had gone to the Horse Expo here in Minnesota, which is an amazing event. It always rains, so you know that in that April weekend it's going to rain, but it's a great event. And I ran into this wonderful team of people who run a polo club out in Baldwin, Wisconsin, and they were very welcoming. And they said, you should come and learn. And I watched their demo out in the arena. I said, I've always wanted to play polo. Everybody sees the polo shirts, and it seems like it's an elitist thing, which in some ways it really is. But you can get into it as a person interested in riding. Fascinating sport, fascinating. And I don't know how many people know that it's teams of 4 people, and you basically ride behind the other person, and you only hit with your right hand. And even if you're left-handed, you have to switch to right-handed. But I'm a right-handed, and you can use your backhand if you want, or you can use the front part of it. But you're riding pretty quickly to hit this small ball with what looks like a long chair leg at a goal that's undefended. It's a field and a half longer than a football field and another half wide of a football field. So it's large open space. And you're just knocking this ball as far ahead as you can. And you expect that people will drop it, so you follow behind them. And your job really is to stay on the horse, number one, and to not crisscross somebody else's travel line as they're riding forward. So learned a lot, played not well, but enough to have a good sense of the experience, but absolutely loved it and wish I'd picked it up earlier to learn how to play better.
So are there polo matches going on that normal people could go watch? The public could go watch them?
Yep. There's one out in Independence. It's kind of a fundraiser. Pretty high-end folks playing a competitive match. And also Baldwin, this farm, and I'll call them out. They're amazing. It's called Maritina Farms. And they host open watches, or open for riders who are interested. If you can stay on a horse or want to learn how to ride, they're really wonderful with beginners and people eager to learn how to play polo. So they hold every summer 2 or 3 different events where people can come and watch.
And you still do all sorts of outdoor stuff, right? The outward bound type, maybe dog sledding. I don't know about sailing as well.
Yep. Yeah. So I've been involved with Outward Bound since I was working in New York City. I started off with urban youth in South Bronx High School in an Outward Bound adapted program. And it was really all about helping myself, certainly, but any young person get a much better sense of themselves through self-esteem. And how do we do things we didn't think we could do, whether it's canoeing, camping, rock climbing. Winter is a wonderful element because it's got so many elements that you think, oh, I can't do this. But once you learn some wonderful ways to stay warm and keep warm, it can be a fabulous experience for people. And then I got involved in the Minnesota Outward Bound School, and I've been on the board of directors for what's called the Voyager Outward Bound School up in Ely for a number of years.
Have you done winter camping where you make your own shelter, anything like that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We pride ourselves on safety and comfort in the environment. So it's not about making you suffer in any way, but really teaching you skills how to live well in any conditions. So I've been on 2 10-day dog sledding trips as a staff training up north, and then I was co-leading a veterans course in the winter. And then every year I bring dog teams down to the corporate groups that I work with to give them a chance to see the experience of working with dogs. And it's not just sitting on the sled, but how do you harness a dog, and how do you do the right way so you don't hurt their shoulders, and then partner with them in a way that you can appreciate how they match with each other. And then there's just chaos as these dogs are ready to run. But as soon as they've been released from the snub line and they're starting to pull the sled forward, it goes completely silent. The dogs are in their zone, and they're just running quietly. And it's just this hiss of the sides of the sled and the sleigh. It's just magical experience. So again, on a bucket list for anybody to work with folks out of Ely to head up and get some time dog sledding. It's a wonderful experience.
So it does sound like you've done tons of work with people who have not been outdoors that much, or these experiences are totally new to them.
Correct. Yeah. In fact, part of the systems you learn is how to stay warm. And too often we think we'll just stay in a warm building and go to a warm car and then drive to your warm office. But, there's still that pioneering spirit in us, Tom, that was like, well, you could break down between here and your office. So embarrassingly, my car is full of survival equipment. Having grown up in the New York area and Vermont skiing every weekend, we would pack for what might seem like a crossing of Arctic just in case we broke down. So people should have equipment in their cars in case, like sleeping bag, blankets, extra food, warm boots, all that stuff, even if you're going to the office.
One thing I just saw on your website is it says you often quote Lonesome Dove. And
Yeah.
what are some of your favorite quotes?
Oh my gosh. Have you read the book or seen the
I
movie?
have. It's one of my favorite books. I have listened to it and read it many times. Love it. Yeah.
Well, I have a number of groups of friends where they become sort of the wise sages of the the world. And sadly, with Robert Duvall's recent passing, there's been a lot of clips of videos that have been sent around in honor of his work. I think that he said was his favorite role he ever played.
Yeah.
And it seemed like to me it was the best book adaptation to a film. Larry McMurtry has an amazing canon of writing, but that one in particular, I think, stands out as a really good one. Gosh, what are the quotes? There's so many of them. You want to say, I just want to see that countryside before the lawyers take it over, let's ride up there, or pigs, take that snake down to the river, and
have you looked into it much to see that a lot of it was based on real life? I've dug into that a lot, and I was amazed. Those characters, to some extent, they lived some of that stuff. Yeah.
Well, I think Atlantic Magazine just came out with a beautiful story about Larry McMurtry, and he's kind of a surly guy. He's an old timer in Montana. He's not interested in the Hollywood glitz. There was a whole bunch of them back then, Hemingway certainly, but then Jim Harrison and Larry McMurtry and William Kittredge. There's a number of folks who have written about what it was like in those early transition years of running a ranch and the simplicity of being a carpenter and fixing things and not just buying new things. And so I think a lot of that storyline does capture what those years were like for people in those prairie towns.
I just met not long ago a guy named Greg Goodnight, and his ancestor was Charles Goodnight, who the Woodrow F. Call was based on him.
Oh,
he
my
kind of
gosh.
thinks that Larry McMurtry stole the family story a little bit, but it's kind of funny.
Well, it may be true, but I think, again, Tommy Lee Jones did a phenomenal job of Woodrow F. Call. And what those two characters, talk about a partnership for life. Those are rare. And I think, even as we as men get older, how do we make sure that we've got a team, an ally, a fire circle that I talk about in the book of people that we can come to and just be ourselves, no posturing, just finding a way to say, hard day today, hard week today, worried about the job, worried about family, any of that stuff where you can actually do that. And I think that partnership with Woodrow and Call was a way of seeing some of those male bonding times in a early setting.
So let's talk a little bit about how you went from having all these real life experiences to teaching other people about them through leadership programs and eventually writing your book and your TEDx talk.
Well, I mentioned in the book that all of this life hard stuff, my dad had a brain hemorrhage before I was born. I got sucked into addiction to alcohol and drugs and then got sober at 22. But all of those hard things, I didn't realize until I saw the heroic journey, the Joseph Campbell heroic journey. And I was in grad school when a professor sort of revealed that to us. And it was Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell did that wonderful, The Power of Myth series on PBS. And it was like discovering a gold mine map. It was like, I could finally now plot my life out and see and for folks who are not familiar with the heroic journey, let me just walk you through it because it ties into why we're so passionate about this kind of work. But if you picture a circle, there is that point of preparation for doing the 5K or moving to Europe or getting married. And there's a call to adventure, join this company, do the marathon, something like that. But then you have to figure, what are the things that are holding me back? And those are those voices in your head or actual barriers that hold you back, guardians of the gate. And as I looked at this, even as I crossed in my Africa trip, what were the roads of challenges? What were the things that were the deepest, darkest, hardest parts, that loneliness of anybody's point in time? And yet when you get through those, as all of us listening have because we're still alive, there is a gift. There is something we've taken back from a divorce or a cancer journey or a physical health challenge that you or your family members have gone through. And as you come back, you kind of want to say, wow, I got through that. Now what do I do about it? And you're kind of in your head and you're kind of giddy at, oh, I did a marathon. And yet somebody's going to slam me back and say, well, I've done 10. Or, you know, you go and do a 3-day retreat, a yoga retreat, and someone says, how was your little holiday? And they like minimize what your experience was because they don't know. And so it really becomes a circle back to figure out, who am I with this new experience? And that's where the allies in the 4 quadrants are so powerful. Who are the allies, Tom, that helped you make any of the choices in your life? And who are the allies that helped you when you were going through something difficult? And who are the allies when you were coming back and kind of giddy about some idea? And they kind of said, whoa, temper that a little bit because the reentry is hard. And so once you've done that, then you want to pass it on to others. So in my 45 years of leadership development, from the urban youth in South Bronx to the corporate work I've been doing around the world in 50 countries, it's really about how do we help people see who they are, the gifts that they bring to the table, and really dust that off so that they stop hiding that. They start actually living into the gifts of who they are. And I think the heroic journey really helps with that a lot.
How about the TEDx talk that you did? Was it a huge effort to boil down all this stuff into under 20 minutes or so?
Yeah, it was 13 minutes.
13.
So
okay.
It was it's quite a thing, and it was on a bucket list for me. I've always wanted to do a TED talk, and it took about a year for them to select you, and then you get some coaches who look through your original draft, and then you do a demo and you practice it, and then if you watch any TED talk, you'll see that there's a red rug, and you're not supposed to leave the rug. And so I wore cowboy boots because that's kind of who I am. And I wore cowboy boots, and I'm trying to keep within this little red circle. And some people memorize it word for word, others wing it. I just practice it so much that I thought, this is my story. And one of the stories I love to tell about this whole journey was not just the heroic journey circle, but the mindset. And I tell that about my wife's cancer journey. And it's just such a powerful example of who we can be in times of challenge. And she had throat cancer, as you saw in the TED Talk and in the book, and it was devastating. And they said, oh my gosh, you're going to have a PEG tube, which is for food, and a port for the infusions. And she said, no, I can do without that. And I was terrified that she was not going to be able to eat because of the radiation treatments to her throat. And she said, all right, I'll take the PEG tube and the port, but I'm going to rename them. And I'm going to call the port power. And I'm going to call the PEG tube, which is that IV bag of food, I'm going to call that purpose. And now I have power and purpose to get me through my journey. And I get choked up every time I tell that or think about it, because that is truly living the heroic journey mindset. We are in a crazy time right now. And some of us want to just recoil and hide in a shell or head in the sand and wait till it's over. But what are the people we're seeing around us who are rising to the challenge, delivering food to people who are shut in, making sure that they're funding examples of where people can get access to resources that they wouldn't ordinarily? Where are we showing up in challenges in our lives? And that truly is the heroic journey mindset today that I want to help people see. And that's why I wrote the book. The epic of you is not the epic of Peter. It's the epic of Tom. It's the epic of any of your listeners to look at your own life and say, wow, I am an experiment of one, as Richard Leider would say. And so rather than try to compare myself, boy, I wish I'm as good as Tom, I'm never going to be as good at the stuff that you're good at, Tom. But I'm also probably going to be better at Peter than anybody else might be. So why don't I just do me really well? And I think in our society, there's been this, graduating batch of kids that you've seen in schools where we get this batch mentality. And the TED Talk by Sir Ken Robinson really illuminated that we've had a mindset of factory making people rather than the power of the individual. And so I'm trying to highlight in the book, you're an individual of one. You be the best Tom Nelson you can be. And I think that's what your podcasts do, is really highlight good things that people are doing who are very much their thing. I mean, you're not, the geologist that you had on, he's got this incredible mind for that type of work. great, go do that. Bring that to the world.
So yeah, I do see a lot of people looking at themselves as victims, and they're looking back at stuff that happened and seeing it as a bad thing. But it seems like you're reframing it to looking back at the stuff and what did I learn from that? You can learn something, no matter if it went well, if it went terrible. You can learn something. And there's a couple other quotes here that this made me think of. My dad maybe used to say, "The north wind made the Vikings." I don't know where that quote came from. And another one, there was a old successful guy in our town, and he would always say, "Thank God for adversity." But it seems similar to what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I love it. I'd never heard that Viking thing, but yeah, the idea of that north wind stealing them for what it takes to live in those climates. The Tuaregs in the Sahara have figured out a way to survive in really harsh conditions. You know, when you look at some of the Inuit tribes, the Native American groups that figured out how to live closer to nature in every type of integration, that's really powerful. And I think we have a lot of learning to do coming from my sort of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you know, somewhat removed from the nature world. How do I immerse myself in a way that I can actually tell when the weather's changing by looking at the clouds or sensing it in the air? Just real quick, talk about dogs. Watching you and I walk the dogs up and down the road here. I let my dogs out and they pause facing the wind and take in all this information, which I'm jealous for. I like, what are you getting? You know, what are you smelling? What are you hearing? And you know they're hearing something from like Anoka County that their sensing is coming this way. And we don't have that ability. We have rationality and we've got some reason, but I envy them for their senses of what they can pick up that we don't have.
The one time I could identify with a dog is I was deer hunting. I could smell a buck coming before he came out, but that was a smelly one. But yeah, dogs can do that all the time. So switching gears here, one thing I've heard you say in multiple podcasts is that as you are talking to groups of people, you can take a couple minutes, there might be 30 people, and you take the time to learn their names and use their names. How do you do that?
Great question. You know, it's not a parlor trick, but I realized that I was terrible at names, as many people are. And yet it makes such a difference if I don't say, hey, you in the black shirt, I'll say Tom. And so group of 30 people, I will just look at the names of who they are, either on their tent cards, and then look at their faces. And I'll just do sort of a snapshot clip of that's Susan, that's Barb, that's Tom, that's, you know, whoever they are, and memorize them. And I'll say, put your 10 cards down. And I just want you to know I know who you are. And I'll just go around the room. And as I say, in a number of these things, that I'll ask the group, how many people think they can't remember 20 or 30 names in 2 minutes? And everybody's hand goes up because who could, you know? And I said, well, neither can I until I made it important. And so by making those types of things important, we can do all kinds of things. And so it's changed for me how I interact with groups. Now, if there's 50, 100, unless I'm going to be with them for 5 days or something where it really makes a sense to memorize them, I'm not going to have all their names. But even in a short workshop, I want to make sure I have 30 or 40 names because it changes the name, the interaction we have with each other. And I'm also modeling for them that they can do it too. And I think that's kind of the message I have too, as I worked in 50 countries around the world. When I lived in Indonesia and ran a corporate training center, I was very small population of Americans living in that town. And I didn't know how many people were going to meet an American, but I wanted them to meet a good one. And so right then I was competing with two Baywatch and Jerry Springer television. And I thought, that's the media they're getting about America back then. I had my work cut out for me. And so I thought, let me show another way to be. And so at least they got another version of what it looks like to be a human being or an American.
You may have said that one reason why we don't remember names is we didn't really listen the first time, so we have zero chance. I think that's part of it. But you don't use any memory device, like if the guy's named Steve, you picture a stove on his head, or you hear stuff like that? Nothing like that?
I don't, and maybe those work. I don't know. That adds more things that I have to remember probably. But if I could just do a facial recognition of that's them, you know, and I keep it short term. I mean, I have a harder time over a year later to see the same group again. I may have some of the names, but not all the names. But I do, for the short-term memory, I find a way to learn those.
I just want to mention this book I read recently a couple of times called Moonwalking with Einstein, which is one of the most interesting books I ever read.
Oh, cool. I'll look for it.
A reporter off the street who is taught how to memorize decks of cards, and he becomes the national champion because he learns all these tricks. And he said, before that, I forgot where my keys were and I didn't know what I had for breakfast yesterday. But he learned all these tricks or these methods, and then he became a champion. So kind of interesting.
Yeah, there are people out there. I saw one of those comedian sort of art shows where he memorized zip codes across the country, and he could tell somebody. They say, "Where are you from?" And they say, "From Avery Island, Louisiana." And they said, "Oh, that's this zip code. Oh, that's this zip code." Or Birmingham, that's this code. Like, I don't know how you do that. I'm terrible with baseball statistics, but some people have the mind for those kinds of things.
So another quote I have heard from you is multitasking is the bane of our existence. You want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, maybe because I'm not good at it, but I just know that if we fraction our lives out trying to do too many things, I'm not giving it the full attention. And I think the counter to that is mindfulness. And certainly, Jon Kabat-Zinn came up with a lot of the things that we can do to be more mindful, but that wasn't his idea. It came from probably Buddhist or even Hindu focusing. Rumi, the Islamic Sufi poet, talks about really focusing in and be here now. When you're chopping wood and carrying water, chop wood, carry water. And our minds are trying to solve every business issue we got in our minds while we're trying to do other things. And I think it's a practice. I'm not always good at it, but I try to focus in that, when I see people, even on these trails here where we live, on a cell phone talking to someone else while they're walking their dog, I kind of wince a little bit. It's like, be in the woods, be with your dog. You have probably a Merlin app for the birds, listen to how many birds you can pick up in the woods out here. And you're missing that if you're on headphones talking to somebody at work. And so I try to simplify that by saying, I am going to try as an exercise to do fewer things and do them better when I do them.
It's fun that you mentioned the Merlin app because I love the Merlin app so much. In the spring, I've been walking my dog just for 10 minutes, and I get maybe 22 species of birds on there that Merlin has identified. Yeah, it is a great thing. Yeah.
Well, and I think it comes to, are we listening to those? Are we able to pick those up as different? The dog certainly is. So how do we as humans build some of our skill sets to better engage and be more attuned to our environments? And I think mindfulness helps us do that.
So you mentioned Jon Kabat-Zinn, and I wrote down a quote that you were quoting him, I think. He said, "I rest all the time."
Yeah.
Do you do that?
Again, I had a wonderful lunch, happened to be with him at a University of Minnesota gathering, and he was very busy. He was there for 3 days. He had all these engagements and speaking, and, as anybody would as a dignitary coming to town. And I said, "Wow, you've got quite an agenda. How do you do it? Aren't you exhausted?" He took a bite of food and then said, "I rest all the time." And I was like, boom, mic drop, that was like the guru passes on a pearl of wisdom. I have tried that. And when those weeks come up where sometimes we used to call them hell weeks, where like, oh my God, have I got to get through this week? No, change that immediately to glory week. This is the week you show how you can do these good things, as many as you have to, and find ways to take rest. There's a wonderful book, and I'm going to blank on it, so I'll send it to you as an email or something. But it talks about the sports medicine, blurbing this one up, but I think it was Jim Lair who wrote the book, and he talks about all the sports people take rests that we don't even see, like at a free throw in basketball, those 3 bounces is quieting out the noise, stopping, bouncing the ball so they get that free shot. Tennis players, right before they serve, bounce the ball 3 times before they do that amazing blistering serve. And so the book is called Power of Full Engagement. And he talks about building in rest. And as corporate athletes, we don't tend to rest. We tend to drive, and close out one contract, start another contract without resting, doing a evaluation of how that went, doing a celebration. And so coming back to it, I am trying to practice resting on those moments where I'm in an Uber between airport and my downtown Chicago client. Meditate, take a rest, read a poetry book, find a way to regather myself for the next storm. And when I do that, it's amazing. So I'm a fledgling on the mindfulness path, but I find certainly where that has helped me in the work that I'm doing. Again, changing not a hell week to a glory week, and then also finding ways to rest, even in those crazy busy days. I don't call them crazy. I'm like, people say, how are you doing? I'm full. Things are full life. This is good. And really bringing the best of ourselves in a positive way.
Speaking of kind of a mental approach maybe to sports, have you ever heard this advice that for people like us, if they're bowling or hitting a tennis ball, you're supposed to just think loose and fluid? Just think that. I don't know. Some professional was saying that. I've tried it a little bit. I think it does help.
Well, I love that, and I will harvest that from you. That's great. I'm reminded of a thing I thought you were going to tell about, is that neuro-linguistic programming. You're familiar with NLP?
Yeah.
And our minds, like you've had a really good golf shot and you're like, woo, that was great. And then you have a terrible golf shot and we downward spiral after the terrible golf shot. And what NLP talks about is anchoring, like even pinching your finger to say that when you had that phenomenal 5-iron off the fairway, that felt like, wow, that was great. Pinch that, enjoy that moment. And then when you're coming up to another one, pinch it again so we can get ourselves back into that loose and fluid that you described.
Yeah.
Gets us back in that mindset, because our minds and our bodies are pumping juices back and forth all the time, some positive, some negative. So if we can minimize the negative energy we give ourselves, there's enough out there we have to deal with as it is.
I think it was Tony Robbins that I remember he was talking about NLP. Does that sound right?
Yep, so. Probably.
But yeah, I do think that there's something to it. I think he gets a lot of criticism, but I think that mindset, there's a lot of value to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else you want to cover here while we still have time?
Yeah, well, certainly enjoy talking to you, Tom,
Yeah.
and appreciate your sharing this. Again, if people are interested in getting the book, I think it's a powerful metaphor for our lives to recognize that each of us is living an epic life. And by that, I don't mean you have to cross the Sahara or climb Everest, but there was a point in my life where I was a single parent and raising 2 young kids, and I'd pick them up after school, and you got to take the laundry. And of course, I was in a, divorced dad type apartment. It wasn't very glamorous, and we didn't have a washer and a dryer, so I had to take the clothes to a laundromat. And I threw the clothes in the washer, and I'm hanging out with the kids doing crayon drawings on their homework of the day. And then I take the clothes, throw them in the dryer, and they're in a big tumble dryer, and you're still in this public laundromat trying to fight the demons that do the why me and poor me kind of stuff. And as I took the machine open after the dryer was done, the clothes were still wet. And it's February. And I got these 2 hungry kids that I got to go home now and make dinner for. And I'm now taking bags and baskets of wet clothes back in the car in February, driving to this solo dad apartment, And you can really downward spiral on, my life sucks, And yet those are the moments when you realize we're being epic in our service to our families. So I kind of want people to get that when you're driving 45 minutes on a commute to a job, that may not be your favorite thing, or you're taking night classes because you want to better yourselves. You all are living epic lives. And I think we miss that. I think that everybody around us has power of what they're doing in who they are. And I would love to sort of fan the flames, the embers of their own lives, of owning the epicness of each person, each of your listeners' lives, for the hard stuff they're doing that they're really not giving themselves credit for.
So just as an aside, it's fun for me that you mentioned public laundromats, because just in recent months, I've spent a lot of time in public laundromats washing horse blankets. And I took some decades off, but it's all automated now. So you have an app and it tells you exactly when everything's going to be done and everything. It's a different world than it was a while back.
No more quarters in the change machine and the little...
You still can do that if you want, I think, but you don't have to. So, another thing I was going to ask, though, is what's next for you? Do you plan other books, or do you still plan to keep doing totally different things? You were going carpentering and taking care of sheep and just every possible job, it seems like. Do you have more of that in your future? Yeah.
I want to live fully for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm 66, so I'm at that point where after 45 years of doing leadership development work, I've loved the work I do. And yet there's also a wonderful book by Arthur Brooks called From Strength to Strength. There's a recognition that what we did in all those years up to 40s and maybe early 50s is different than where we're going in our later years. And I'm really fascinated about how do I make this transition and how can I help others make this transition. So there may be other books in me for sure, because I believe in presenting as I learn my journey and share others wiser than me who are finding out here's how to age well, how to grow in your aging rather than sort of retire and check out and go golf and live in Florida or something. I think there's more to it than that. So I want to say, what is the next chapter going to be? And I'm pretty engaged around what that's going to look like.
Do you think AI and technology is going to make much of a difference, or is that ancient wisdom still, from 2,000 years ago, is still going to be valid 2,000 years from now?
Well, I hope so. I'm a little bit of a Luddite on the whole AI thing, although I'm seeing glimpses of where that can also be useful. But I'm wary of seeing that we take everything that comes out of AI as gospel and truth, because it isn't necessarily. I think what's going to happen is it's going to come back to us as human beings to discern, is that in fact right? Is that true? Is that the right description of what I just gave it to read? And always having this type of discourse. I think human to human discourse is never going to go out of fashion. And in fact, I think the zig and the zag, as that zigs towards more AI, I'm seeing a groundswell of more book salons, more men's groups, more women's gatherings where people are saying community is where it's at. And so, yeah, do the AI thing, but don't lose the humanity, the art, the dance, the music, the creativity. My license plate is the word create, as you probably have seen as I drive by. And it's because I believe we're here to create, to pass on, and to learn. And so I really hope that we can work, with AI, not be lost from it.
All right. We'll end on that note. Peter Bailey, thanks a lot. And I put a link in the show description to your website and the Amazon link to your book, so people can go out there and get that stuff. Thanks.
Tom, thanks so much. Great talking to you, and look forward to seeing you walking the dog again.
All right. Talk to you later.